Welcome to Lore of the Ring, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. There are places in Middle-earth where the light falls differently. Not the warm, golden light of the Shire's afternoon sun, nor the silver radiance of Lothlorien's twilight. No, this is light filtered through layer upon layer of ancient canopy, strained through leaves that have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, diffused into a green-tinged gloom that seems less illumination than a different kind of darkness. Fangorn Forest is such a place. Stand at its borders, if you dare, and you will feel it immediately. The boundary is not merely geographical but ontological, a threshold between the world as it is commonly known and something far older, far stranger. The air changes. It thickens, becomes textured with moisture and the scent of bark and loam that has never known the sun. Sounds carry differently here, muffled and distorted, as though the forest itself is listening, deciding whether to admit you or turn you away. And deep within those shadows, deeper than any path leads, there walks a being who has measured his footsteps in centuries rather than strides, whose thoughts unfold at the pace of seasons, whose memory stretches back to the first age when the world was young and terrible. His name is Fangorn. The men of Rohan call him Treebeard, and they speak of him, when they speak of him at all, with a reverence that borders on fear. But what if that fear is justified in ways even they do not suspect? What if the gentle giant of Tolkien's published tales, the wise shepherd of the trees who befriended Merry and Pippin, who led the march on Isengard with righteous fury, what if he was once imagined as something far darker? Something that even the professor himself, in his mercy and his craft, chose to soften to gentle, to render palatable for a world that might not be ready for the full weight of his vision. Picture, if you will, a figure among the trees. Not quite tree, not quite man, but something in between, or perhaps something that predates both, that exists in a category all its own. His bark skin is grooved with patterns that might be age or might be script in a language older than speech. His eyes, when they open fully, hold depths that do not merely reflect light but seem to absorb it, drawing it down into wells of consciousness that have been accumulating thought and memory since before the sun first rose. He moves slowly, painfully slowly to mortal perception. Each step is a deliberation, each gesture a meditation. To the hasty races, men, elves, even dwarves, this slowness seems like wisdom, like thoughtfulness. And perhaps it is. But perhaps it is also calculation. Patience of a kind that makes mortal cunning look like the scurrying of insects. The slow, inexorable deliberation of a predator so vast and so patient that its prey cannot even recognize themselves as such until the trap has long since closed. The mist curls through Fangorn's depths this morning, if it is morning. Time itself seems to pool and eddy strangely here, flowing at different rates in different groves. Through that mist, a sound, the creak of wood under immense weight, the whisper of leaves that might be wind or might be speech. And beneath it all, so low it is felt rather than heard, a rumble like the earth's own voice speaking syllables in a tongue that predates language itself. Treebeard is moving through his domain, his forest, his kingdom. And in the scholarly halls of those who study Tolkien's works, in the archives where unpublished manuscripts sleep in acid-free boxes, in the letters and drafts and discarded fragments that chart the evolution of Middle-earth from conception to publication. There lies evidence of a truth that has been whispered only in the shadows of academia. The Treebeard we know, the character who helped destroy Saruman, who mourned the Entwives, who spoke in long, rolling sentences full of ancient memory and gentle wisdom. This Treebeard was not the first Treebeard, not the original conception, not the being that first emerged from Tolkien's imagination when he sat down to populate the forests of his sub-created world. That first Treebeard was something else entirely. Oh, the surface details remained much the same. The physical description, the slow speech, the deep connection to the forest. But underneath, in the currents of intention and characterization, in the moral framework that governed his actions and choices, there, the differences were profound, disturbing, dark. The early drafts, the fragments that scholars have pieced together from Tolkien's working papers, paint a picture of an Ent who was less shepherd and more judge, less guardian and more executioner. A being whose protection of the forest came not from love, but from a mandate so ancient and so absolute that it transcended conventional morality entirely. In those early conceptions, Treebeard was a force of nature in the most literal and terrible sense. Not good or evil in the way those terms are commonly understood, but other, operating according to laws that preceded and superseded the ethical frameworks of elves and men. A being for whom the destruction of those who threatened the trees was not a reluctant necessity, but a sacred duty, carried out with a thoroughness that bordered on relish. The fog thickens around the ancient trunks. Somewhere in the distance, something crashes through the undergrowth, something large, moving with purpose through terrain that would be impassable to lesser beings. And then, silence. The heavy, expectant silence of a forest holding its breath. Treebeard is near. And if you listen, truly listen, with senses refined beyond the merely physical, you might hear what the trees hear. The whisper that runs through root and branch, the communication that exists below the threshold of conscious thought. A warning, perhaps, or a judgment, or simply the acknowledgement that something very old and very powerful is paying attention, and that attention, regardless of intention, is a weight that mortal beings were never meant to bear. This is not a tale of simple villainy. Tolkien's imagination was far too sophisticated, far too nuanced for such crude categorization. The question we must explore is not whether Treebeard was evil. Such labels are inadequate, reductive, ultimately meaningless when applied to beings of such antiquity and otherness. No, the question is more subtle and far more unsettling. Was there a darkness in Treebeard's original conception that Tolkien himself recognized and deliberately softened? Did the professor, in his process of revision and refinement, take a character who embodied nature's terrifying indifference and judgmental wrath and reshape him into something more palatable, more heroic, more aligned with the narrative of the Fellowship's struggle against Sauron? And if so, what was lost in that transformation? What truth about the nature of power, of guardianship, of the relationship between civilization and wilderness was buried beneath the gentler characterization we received? The roots of Fangorn run deep, deeper than maps can chart, deeper than even elven memory reaches. They tap into the bones of the earth itself, drawing sustenance from springs that predate the shaping of Arda. And in those depths, in the darkness beneath the soil, memories persist. Memories of what was intended, what was first imagined, what might have been. The leaves whisper it still, for those who have ears to hear. The truth of Treebeard, the shadow beneath the canopy, The darkness that even the greatest of Tolkien's servants of the light might once have been imagined to carry. We are about to descend into those roots, to excavate those buried memories, to uncover the layers of revision and reconsideration that separate the published Treebeard from his darker progenitor. It is an archaeological dig through the strata of creative imagination, and what we unearth may challenge everything you thought you knew about the Ents, about Fangorn, about the nature of good and evil in Middle-earth itself. The forest watches, the trees remember, and Treebeard, in all his incarnations, published and unpublished, gentle and terrible, shepherd and destroyer, stands at the center of this mystery, a living monument to the complexity of Tolkien's moral imagination. Come. The path into Fangorn awaits. It is overgrown and treacherous, this path. It leads to places where sunlight fears to venture and where certainties dissolve into the mist. But the truth, however unsettling, waits in those depths. What Tolkien first imagined for Fangorn may shock even the most devoted of fans. Before we can understand what Treebeard might have been, we must first comprehend what the Ents are, their place in the deep mythology of Middle-earth, their origins in the mind of Iluvatar and the councils of the Valar. The story begins not in the Third Age, not in the War of the Ring, but in the depths of the Elder Days, when the world was still being shaped and the great themes of its music were still resolving into form. Yavanna the Bountiful, the Vala of growing things, had looked upon the works of Alle the Smith and seen that he had created the dwarves, beings who would delve and mine, who would cut and shape the bones of the earth to their purposes. And she was troubled. For the dwarves would need timber for their forges and mines. They would need wood, and they would take it without thought for the trees that provided it. In her concern, Yavanna spoke to Manwë, mightiest of the Valar, and asked that the trees themselves might have protectors, that they might have shepherds who could speak for them, who could move as the children of Iluvatar moved, who could defend the forests against those who would despoil them. This tale is recounted in the Silmarillion, in that chapter titled Of Alle and Yavanna, and it establishes something crucial about the Ents from their very conception. They were created as a counterbalance, a defensive measure, a force meant to stand against the exploitation of nature. They were not, in their original design, gentle caretakers. They were guardians, and guardianship, when taken to its logical extreme, can become a terrible thing. Manwë brought Yavanna's concern before Iluvatar himself, and in the mystery of the one's design, the Ents were woven into the music of creation. When the elves awakened and began their long tutelage under the Valar, it was they who taught the trees to speak. And in response, the trees taught certain spirits to take form in wood and bark and leaf. Thus the Ents came to be. The early history of their kind is shrouded in the mists of the Elder Days. We know they walked the great forests of Beleriand before its drowning. We know they witnessed the wars of elves and men against Morgoth. We know they survived cataclysms that reshaped continents and redrew the maps of the world. But of their character, their nature, their actions in those ancient times, here the records grow sparse. Tolkien himself provided only glimpses, fragments, hints of a presence vast and slow and utterly other than the quick-burning races of elves and men. What we do know is this: the Ents were old when the sun was young. They measured time in the growth rings of trees, in the slow uplift of mountains, in the patient carving of rivers through stone. To them, the rise and fall of kingdoms was a season's turning. The lives of men were as brief as mayflies. Even the immortal elves, in their comings and goings, their wars and wanderings, must have seemed hasty to Entish perception. And with that perspective came a kind of detachment, an emotional distance from the urgencies that drove the younger races. The Ents cared for the trees, yes, this was their purpose, their reason for being, but cared for them, for the elves who had taught them speech, for the men who spread across Middle-earth like wildfire, clearing forests for farmland, felling trees for timber, burning wood in their endless forges. The relationship was complicated. Treebeard himself, as rendered in the Two Towers, speaks of this complexity. He remembers the elves fondly, particularly those who taught the trees to speak. But his attitude toward men is more ambiguous. He calls them hasty, dismissive. And when Merry and Pippin first encounter him, he is not welcoming but suspicious, cautious, uncertain whether these small creatures represent yet another threat to his domain. In the published work, Tolkien softens this caution with humor, with the gentle absurdity of Treebeard's long deliberations and longer stories. The Ent becomes almost comic in his ponderous thoughtfulness, a kindly old figure who eventually befriends the hobbits and is roused to heroic action against Saruman's depredations. But in the drafts, the edges were sharper. Scholars who have studied the evolution of Treebeard's character through Tolkien's manuscripts note significant differences in tone and characterization. In early versions, Treebeard's caution toward the hobbits is not played for gentle comedy, but for genuine tension. He is not merely slow, but deeply mistrustful. Not merely ancient, but aloof in a way that borders on hostile. There are passages, excised from the final version, where Treebeard's examination of Merry and Pippin takes on a more interrogatory quality, where his questions probe not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Where the implicit threat, what might happen if he judges them enemies of the forest, hangs more heavily in the air. And there are moments, buried in the drafts, where Treebeard's memories of dealing with intruders in the past carry a darker weight. Where the fate of those who came into Fangorn with ill intent is described not with regret, but with a kind of grim satisfaction. The forest, in these earlier conceptions, was not merely guarded, but sealed. Fangorn was not a place you passed through, but a place that decided whether to release you. And Treebeard, as its eldest and most powerful inhabitant, was not a benevolent guide, but a judge whose verdicts were absolute and whose sentences were carried out with the slow, inexorable patience of nature itself. Consider the implications. An entity that exists outside the normal bounds of morality as understood by men and elves. A being whose primary loyalty is not to individuals or even to peoples, but to an entire domain of living things. A guardian for whom the destruction of those who threaten his charges is not a tragic necessity, but a duty performed without hesitation or regret. This is the Treebeard that exists in shadowy outline beneath the published text. A figure of terrifying power operating according to a moral framework that does not align with conventional heroism. Not evil, precisely, but not good either, at least not in ways that the children of Iluvatar would recognize. The fog of Fangorn conceals many things. Ancient trees whose names are remembered only in the oldest Entish dialects. Clearings where Entwives once danced before their inexplicable disappearance. Paths that twist and turn according to no geography mapped by elven cartographers. And beneath it all, the slow pulse of Treebeard's consciousness. Observing, remembering, judging. The trees lean close now, their branches forming a canopy so dense that full darkness falls even at noon. And in that darkness, something moves. Something vast and deliberate, each footfall measured, each breath drawn lasting long enough to fill mortal lungs 12 times over. He is aware of us now, this ancient being. Aware of our intrusion into his realm, our examination of his nature, our excavation of secrets that perhaps were meant to remain buried beneath the roots. And we must ask ourselves, does he approve? Does he understand that this investigation comes from respect, from a desire to comprehend the full complexity of Tolkien's vision? Or does he judge it an intrusion, a threat, a trespass that demands response? The trees do not answer. They only whisper, leaves rustling with words in a language that predates speech, that exists below the threshold of translation. But the message, if message it is, seems clear enough. In Tolkien's early notes, Treebeard's path was far from innocent. Now we must venture deeper still, into the specific textual evidence that reveals the darkness lurking in Treebeard's original conception. This requires careful examination of manuscripts, letters, and the evolution of the text through multiple drafts, an archaeological dig through the layers of Tolkien's creative process. The History of Middle-earth series, that monumental scholarly project edited by Christopher Tolkien, provides our primary evidence. In particular, volumes VII and VIII, The Treason of Isengard and The War of the Ring, document the development of the chapters featuring Treebeard and the Ents. What emerges from this documentation is striking. Treebeard's character underwent significant softening as Tolkien revised the text. In early drafts, Treebeard's first reaction to discovering Merry and Pippin is not the bemused curiosity of the published version, but something closer to threat assessment. He circles them repeatedly, examining them from all angles, and his questions are not gentle inquiries but interrogations. There is a passage, ultimately cut, where he explicitly states that the forest has rules for intruders, and that those who break them do not leave by the paths they entered. The implication is chilling. Fangorn, in this conception, is not merely dangerous, but actively enforces its boundaries through Treebeard's agency. Those who enter without permission, who harm the trees, who threaten the forest's integrity, they simply disappear. Consumed by the woods, absorbed into the soil. Their fate a warning that needs no words because no one survives to carry the tale outside the forest bounds. This version of Treebeard operates less as a character in the conventional sense and more as an extension of the forest itself. Its will made mobile, its judgment made manifest. He is nature personified, and nature, as any ecologist can tell you, is not gentle. It is efficient, ruthless, operating according to principles of survival and balance that care nothing for individual suffering. There are other telling details in the drafts. Treebeard's eyes, for instance, are described with particular attention to their depth and their unsettling quality. In one excised passage, Pippin describes feeling as though he is being examined not merely physically, but spiritually, as though Treebeard's gaze penetrates to the very essence of what he is, weighing his worth according to criteria that have nothing to do with heroism or kindness, but with something else entirely. Compatibility with the forest, perhaps. Threat level, potential for corruption or violence against the trees. And there is this. In the earlier drafts, Treebeard's speech patterns are less whimsical, less filled with the gentle humor that characterizes them in the published version. His long, rolling sentences are present. Yes, this was always part of the character, but they carry a different weight. They feel less like the musings of a kindly old shepherd and more like pronouncements from something ancient and powerful that is humoring these small creatures with speech they can comprehend, while its true thoughts move in channels too deep and slow for mortal minds to follow. The drafts also reveal more detail about Treebeard's methods of dealing with threats. In the published version, when he discovers Saruman's depredations, the axes, the fires, the wholesale slaughter of trees for Isengard's war machine, he is roused to righteous anger. It is presented as an awakening, a breaking of long patience, a turning point where the slow Ents are finally moved to decisive action. But earlier versions frame it differently. There, Treebeard's response to Saruman's treachery carries less shock and more vindication. As though he had been waiting, expecting betrayal, perhaps even hoping for it in some dark corner of his ancient consciousness. Because betrayal justified response, gave permission for the kind of vengeance that he had been holding in check for centuries. This is a crucial distinction. The published Treebeard is reluctantly roused to violence. The earlier Treebeard seems almost eager for it once the justification is clear. Not from bloodlust in any conventional sense. Ents do not have blood to lust for, but from a deep satisfaction in finally being able to exercise the full extent of his power against those who deserved it. There's a predatory patience to this characterization, the sense of something very large and very dangerous that has been holding itself in check not from gentleness but from strategic calculation, waiting for the right moment, the right provocation, the right excuse to unleash forces that, once unleashed, would be unstoppable. Consider also Treebeard's relationship with the other Ents. In the published version, the Ent Moot is presented as a democratic gathering, a slow but genuine deliberation where all voices are heard and consensus is sought. Treebeard facilitates this process, guides it, but does not dominate it. Yet in the drafts, there are hints of a different dynamic. Passages where Treebeard's suggestions carry more weight than mere advice, where his framing of the question before the Ent Moot subtly predetermines the answer, where his ancient authority overrules younger voices not through force, but through the sheer gravitational pull of his personality and status. This is manipulation, however benevolent its intent. It is the exercise of power in its most subtle and effective form, shaping consensus, managing opinion, ensuring that the outcome aligns with one's own desires while maintaining the appearance of collective decision-making. Is this evil? Not by any simple definition, but it is certainly dark. It reveals a character who is not the simple, straightforward shepherd of the published version, but a far more complex and morally ambiguous figure. One who has learned, over thousands of years, how to get what he wants, how to guide without seeming to command, how to achieve his ends while maintaining the veneer of collective action. And then there is the question of the Entwives. In the published legendarium, their loss is presented as a great tragedy, a sundering that has left Treebeard and his kind diminished, lonely, mourning. The circumstances of their disappearance are left deliberately vague, lost in the mists of the Second Age, a mystery that adds poignancy to Treebeard's character. But in Tolkien's notes and drafts, there are suggestions of a more complicated story. Hints that the separation was not entirely accidental or externally imposed. That there were philosophical differences between the Ents and Entwives, disagreements about how to interact with the younger races, debates about whether to remain isolated in the wild forests or to engage with the spreading civilizations of men. And in some of these notes, there are implications, never fully developed, but present nonetheless. that Treebeard and the other male Ents did not fight as hard as they might have to prevent the separation, that there was a part of them, perhaps unacknowledged even to themselves, that was relieved when the Entwives chose to dwell in more cultivated lands, tending gardens and orchards rather than the wild wood. Why? Because the Entwives represented compromise. They represented engagement with civilization, with agriculture, with the transformation of wild nature into managed landscapes. They represented, in essence, a different path, one that might have prevented the Ents from becoming what they are in the Third Age. Isolated, insular, withdrawn from the concerns of other races, suspicious of outsiders, and ultimately rigid in their commitment to an absolutist vision of protecting the wild at all costs. If this reading has any validity, and the textual evidence suggests it might, then Treebeard's mourning for the Entwives takes on a darker shade. It becomes not merely grief for what was lost, but perhaps guilt for what was allowed to be lost. Or worse, a kind of performative sorrow that covers a deeper satisfaction that the complicating voices are gone, leaving the Ents free to pursue their own increasingly isolationist path without internal dissent. The forest grows darker around us now. The trees press closer. And somewhere in the depths, that slow footfall continues, each step a deliberation, each pause a thought that might take weeks to complete. We are being observed, evaluated. And the criteria by which we are being judged are not ones we fully understand, nor ones we might pass if we did. This is the truth beneath the gentle giant of the published text. This is the shadow in the canopy, the darkness that Tolkien glimpsed in his early drafting and then, perhaps recognizing it as too unsettling for the story he was telling, gradually softened and reshaped into something more heroic, more palatable, more aligned with the moral framework of the Fellowship's quest. But the darkness was there first. It was the original conception. And in the branches above, in the roots below, in the slow pulse of sap through ancient wood, it remains. Beneath the slow wisdom, there was a spark of something older, something the world might call evil. To understand Treebeard's potential for darkness, we must return to his origins, not merely in Tolkien's creative process, but within the metaphysics of Middle-earth itself. We must examine the divine mandate under which the Ents were created and consider what that mandate truly implied. Yavanna's petition to Iluvatar, as recorded in the Silmarillion, was explicit. The trees needed shepherds who could speak for those that have no voices. But more than this, she asked that these shepherds be capable of defending the forests against those who would harm them. Defense, protection. These words sound benign. They conjure images of gentle guardianship, of watchful care. But defense, when you possess the power of the Ents, takes on a very different character. Consider the physical capabilities of a fully roused Ent. They are described as being capable of tearing apart stone with their bare hands, of tossing boulders as though they were pebbles, of moving with surprising speed despite their size when motivated. An Ent in fury is a force of nature, quite literally. They are living siege engines, battering rams of flesh and wood in ancient wrath. Now consider that power deployed not against towers and walls, but against individual beings. Against orcs, certainly, those are enemies whose destruction troubles no one's conscience. But what about men? What about dwarves whose axes are tools of their craft, not weapons of malice? What about anyone who, in the Ents' judgment, poses a threat to the trees? The mandate from Yavanna contained no caveats, no limitations, no requirement for proportional response. It was absolute: defend the forests, against all who would despoil them. by any means necessary. This is the theological foundation of Treebeard's power. He is not acting according to personal whim or individual psychology. He is fulfilling a divine commission, carrying out the will of Avala, acting as an instrument of Yavanna's protective fury. And fury it is, not love, not gentleness, not the nurturing care that one might associate with the Vala of growing things. Yavanna's petition to Iluvatar was born from fear of what the dwarves, and by extension, all the waking races, might do to her beloved trees. And that fear transmuted into the creation of defenders capable of matching threat with overwhelming response. The Ents are Yavanna's wrath made manifest, her judgment incarnated in wood and bark, her no given voice and limbs and the power to enforce boundaries with terminal finality. In the biblical traditions that Tolkien drew upon so deeply in his mythology, there is a concept of divine wrath that operates according to very different rules than human morality. When God sends the flood, when fire falls on Sodom, when plagues strike Egypt, these are not acts that can be judged by normal ethical standards. They are categorical, they are absolute, they are expressions of a justice so foreign to human understanding that we can only watch in awe and terror. Tolkien, as a devout Catholic and a scholar of medieval theology, understood this tradition intimately. And there are suggestions, scattered through his letters and notes, that he imagined the Ents operating within a similar framework. They were not evil, but neither were they good in any sense that would comfort mortal hearts. They were other operating according to a divine mandate that transcended the ethical systems of elves and men. Their judgments were final, their executions absolute, and their patience, while vast, was not infinite. What happens when that patience ends? We see it at Isengard. The published version gives us the answer: overwhelming destruction. The Ents tear down Saruman's fortress with methodical fury. They break the dam, flood the caverns, dismantle the machinery of war. And in all of this, there is a righteousness, a sense that justice is being served, that the traitor is receiving his earned punishment. But look more closely at the text. Look at what Tolkien actually describes, not what we remember or what the films portrayed. The Ents do not merely defeat Saruman's forces. They annihilate them. They crush orcs beneath their feet. They hurl stones that leave smears where bodies stood. They show no mercy, offer no quarter, accept no surrender. The battle is not a military engagement, but an extermination. And Treebeard, careful, deliberate, slow-to-anger Treebeard, leads this destruction with what can only be called satisfaction. He is not grimly doing what must be done. He is enjoying it. Finally, after centuries of restraint, of watching Saruman's corruption spread, of seeing trees felled and burned, he has permission to respond with the full force of his nature. This is Yavanna's wrath. This is what was always implicit in the Ents' creation: the capacity for overwhelming violence in defense of their charges, the willingness to obliterate threats with prejudice so extreme it leaves no room for rehabilitation, no possibility of redemption. Is it evil? Or is it simply nature expressing itself through channels that civilization finds uncomfortable? A forest fire is not evil when it clears deadwood and allows new growth. A flood is not evil when it scours a valley and deposits rich soil for future cultivation. These are natural processes, operating according to principles that predate and supersede human morality. The Ents, in their original conception, were the same. They were not moral agents in the way that elves and men are moral agents. They were forces, directed forces, to be sure, possessing intelligence and will, but forces nonetheless. And forces do not compromise. They do not show mercy. They do not recognize shades of gray. They see threat and they respond. Absolutely. Terminally. With the full weight of their power brought to bear until the threat is eliminated. This is what Tolkien glimpsed in his early drafting, a Treebeard who embodied this principle without mitigation, who was, in essence, a natural disaster given personality. Terrifying not because he was malicious, but because he was implacable. The later revisions softened this, added humor, added warmth, added the friendship with Merry and Pippin that gives readers an emotional anchor, a way to sympathize with this alien consciousness. These changes were wise from a narrative perspective. They made Treebeard accessible, made him someone we could root for rather than recoil from. But they also buried the darker truth of what he was designed to be, an instrument of divine wrath. A boundary enforcer. A being for whom the concept of excessive force had no meaning because any force necessary to defend the forest was, by definition, justified. The roots of Fangorn tap into deep places, places where water runs through stone worn smooth by eons. Places where the heat of the earth's core warms springs that never see sunlight. And from those depths, Treebeard draws not merely sustenance but purpose. He remembers his commission. He remembers Yavanna's instruction. He remembers what he was made to be. And on nights when the stars wheel overhead in patterns he has watched for thousands of years, when the forest breathes in rhythm with his own slow pulse, when the boundary between self and trees dissolves into a unity of purpose and being on those nights, does he remember also the restraint he shows? The mercy he extends to the hasty races who live and die in the blink of his existence? Does he remember, and does he resent it? This is the question that Tolkien's drafts raise, but do not answer. The shadow that lurks beneath the gentle giant's characterization. Was the gentle giant we know the product of Tolkien's mercy, or a mask over his original terror? The Ent Moot is presented, in The Two Towers, as one of the most distinctive set pieces in all of Tolkien's work. It is deliberation taken to an almost absurd extreme, 3 days of discussion to reach a conclusion that, to Merry and Pippin's hasty minds, seems obvious within hours. But what if we read the Ent Moot not as comic relief or world-building flavor, but as political theater? As a carefully managed process designed to produce a predetermined outcome while maintaining the appearance of democratic deliberation. This reading requires us to look carefully at Treebeard's role in the proceedings. He is not merely a participant but the convener, the facilitator, the one who frames the questions and guides the discussion. And in any deliberative process, the one who frames the question often determines the answer. Consider how Treebeard introduces the matter to the gathered Ents. He does not present it as an open question. What, if anything, should we do about Saruman? Instead, he frames it in terms that make action almost inevitable. Saruman has betrayed them, has murdered trees, has become an enemy of the forest. The question becomes not whether to respond, but how. This is subtle. In the published version, it's easy to miss because Tolkien renders the Ent Moot with such charm, such attention to the poetry of Entish deliberation, that we don't scrutinize the underlying power dynamics. But they're there. Treebeard is the eldest. This gives him authority that goes beyond mere respect. In a culture that values age and memory as the Ents do, to be the oldest is to be, in a very real sense, the wisest, the most legitimate, the most authoritative. When Treebeard speaks, he is not offering opinions that might be debated. He is offering judgments from a position of unassailable seniority. The other Ents defer to him constantly. They seek his opinion, they wait for his assessment, they look to him for guidance. And he provides it, not through direct commands, which would be unseemly in a culture that prides itself on thoughtfulness and consensus, but through careful shaping of the discussion. He shares information selectively. He emphasizes certain facts over others. He directs attention toward Saruman's betrayals and away from more complicated questions, like what their response might mean for the broader war, or whether there might be consequences for emerging from their isolation after centuries of non-intervention. In the drafts, this manipulation is more explicit. There are passages where other Ents raise objections or suggest alternative courses of action, and Treebeard overrules them not through logical argument, but through the sheer weight of his presence. He invokes his memories of the elder days, speaks of mandates and purposes that predate the other Ents' existence, frames his preferred course of action as a return to their original nature rather than a departure from it. This is how power operates in its most effective form, not through obvious coercion, but through the subtle management of discourse. By determining what questions are asked, what options are considered legitimate, what histories are remembered and emphasized, those in authority can produce outcomes that appear democratic while actually reflecting their own preferences. Was Treebeard doing this consciously? Did he set out to manipulate the Ent Moot toward a predetermined conclusion? That question may be unanswerable. Tolkien, even in his drafts, did not give us direct access to Treebeard's internal psychology. But the structural evidence suggests that, whether consciously or not, Treebeard exercised enormous influence over the process. The Ent Moot was not genuinely deliberative, but rather a ritual of consensus building around conclusions that Treebeard had already reached. And those conclusions were violent. The decision was to march on Isengard, to tear down its walls, to destroy Saruman's power. Not to negotiate, not to seek understanding of what had driven Saruman to his actions, not to consider whether there might be a response short of total war. No, the decision was for destruction. Absolute, overwhelming, terminal. And Treebeard ensured that this was the decision reached while maintaining the appearance that it emerged organically from collective deliberation. There's a darker reading still, hinted at in the drafts, that Treebeard wanted this war. That he had been chafing for centuries under the restraint of isolation, watching the younger races spread and build and cut and burn, and had been waiting for an excuse, a sufficient provocation that would justify unleashing the full power of the Ents without violating his own sense of mandate. Saruman's betrayal provided that excuse. Perfect, unambiguous, allowing no room for moral complexity. An Istari who had once been trusted, who had walked in Fangorn and spoken with its shepherd, had turned traitor and become a despoiler. This was not a gray area. This was clear, and so Treebeard seized upon it, used it, channeled centuries of accumulated frustration and resentment into a righteous crusade against an enemy who deserved everything they were about to receive. Was this justice? Or was it opportunism? Was Treebeard acting as a neutral enforcer of boundaries, or was he satisfying a hunger for action, for relevance, for the exercise of power that had been denied him for too long? The published version does not encourage these questions. The published Treebeard is straightforward, slow to anger but righteous when roused, leading his people into battle because there is no other choice, destroying Isengard because it must be destroyed. But the drafts paint a more complex picture. A Treebeard who is strategically patient, who manipulates consensus, who may have engineered the very confrontation he claims to be reluctantly pursuing. Not through lies, Ents do not lie, in Tolkien's mythology, but through selective emphasis, through careful framing, through the subtle exercise of authority that makes his preferences appear as collective wisdom. This is political sophistication of a high order. It requires understanding of group dynamics, of rhetoric, of how to move large bodies toward predetermined conclusions while maintaining their buy-in to the process. It is not the behavior of a simple shepherd or a gentle guardian. It is the behavior of someone who has learned, over thousands of years, how to get what he wants, how to exercise power without appearing to do so, how to wage war while maintaining the moral high ground of defensive action. The Entmoot concludes, the decision is made. The Ents will march to war, and Isengard will fall, and Saruman's power will be broken. And Treebeard, who framed the question, who guided the deliberation, who spoke with the authority of ages and the weight of divine mandate, Treebeard has achieved exactly what he intended from the beginning. The forest watches this political theater with ancient eyes. The trees understand what the hobbits do not, what perhaps even the other Ents only dimly perceive, that their eldest is not merely wise but cunning, not merely thoughtful but strategic, not merely a shepherd but a ruler who maintains power through the appearance of humility while never relinquishing control. Is this darkness? Is this evil? Or is it simply competence? The natural result of consciousness applied across centuries to the problems of leadership and governance. The boundary between wisdom and manipulation, between guidance and control, between consensus and coercion, it blurs in the slow time of Fangorn. And Treebeard stands at the center of that ambiguity, a figure whose true nature may be unknowable even to himself. Could the Ents' slow wisdom conceal a darker, more calculating mind? The march on Isengard is one of the pivotal moments of the Two Towers, a turning point where the slow, isolated Ents finally take decisive action in the wider war. In both the novel and Peter Jackson's film adaptation, it is presented as a triumph, a moment of righteous fury, the overdue response of nature against those who would exploit and destroy it. But let us examine what actually happens at Isengard. Let us look closely at the text, at what Tolkien describes when the Ents come to war. They arrive at night under cover of darkness. This is strategic. It denies Saruman warning, prevents him from marshaling a defense. But it also carries a particular emotional weight. There is something primal, something terrifying about an attack that comes in darkness. It denies the enemy even the dignity of seeing what destroys them. The Ents do not announce themselves, do not issue challenges or ultimatums. They simply begin tearing down the walls. The orcs and men in Saruman's service have no time to surrender, no opportunity to plead their case. The Ents arrive and immediately commence destruction. Tolkien's prose here is striking. He describes Ents hurling boulders that crush gates, tearing down walls as though they were made of paper, snapping siege engines like twigs. The physical devastation is total, but more than this, there is a sense of satisfaction in the description. The Ents are not grimly doing what must be done. They are reveling in it. They had come to destroy Isengard, the text tells us, not to stop Saruman, not to disable his war machine, to destroy. Utterly and completely, leaving nothing that could be rebuilt. This is not defense. This is not even punishment. This is annihilation. And what of Saruman's forces? The orcs and men who had served him, some willingly, certainly, but others perhaps through coercion or necessity. What chance did they have against the fury of the Ents? None. The text is clear on this. They were crushed, drowned, buried in rubble. Those who tried to flee found the Ents waiting at every gate, blocking every exit. There was no escape, no quarter offered, no mercy shown. From a strategic perspective, this makes sense. Saruman's forces represented a threat not merely to Rohan, but to the broader war effort against Sauron. Their destruction advanced the cause of the Free Peoples. In the grand calculus of the War of the Ring, the annihilation of Isengard's garrison was a necessary and positive outcome. But from a moral perspective, when we set aside the strategic necessities and simply examine the act itself, thousands of sentient beings killed, drowned, crushed, with no opportunity for surrender or redemption. The Ents, under Treebeard's leadership, committed what can only be called a massacre. Not a war crime, such concepts don't quite apply in Middle-earth's context, but a slaughter nonetheless. Total, absolute, unmitigated by any attempt to distinguish between the truly guilty and those who might have been forced into Saruman's service, between the irredeemable and those who might have been saved. In the drafts, this is even more explicit. Earlier versions contain passages describing Ents literally tearing orcs limb from limb, crushing men beneath their feet, showing a physical brutality that Tolkien eventually softened in revision. But the basic facts remain. The Ents did not wage war in any conventional sense. They enacted judgment. And the judgment was death, delivered with overwhelming force and no possibility of appeal. Treebeard himself kills. The text is subtle about this. Tolkien does not linger on individual acts of violence, but the implication is clear. The eldest Ent, the shepherd, the wise counselor who spoke gently with Merry and Pippin about the deep history of Middle-earth, personally participated in the slaughter. His hands, which had tended trees for millennia, were stained with blood and crushed flesh. Was this justice? The orcs were creatures of evil, bred by Morgoth and Sauron for war and cruelty. Their destruction was not merely permissible but necessary. And the men who served Saruman had chosen their allegiance, had willingly participated in the despoiling of Fangorn, had earned whatever fate the Ents delivered. This is the argument for righteousness, and it has weight. Within Tolkien's moral framework, there are indeed forces of absolute evil that must be opposed absolutely, with no quarter and no compromise. The orcs represent such a force. But even if we accept this, and I think Tolkien would have us accept it, there remains something unsettling about the manner of the Ents' attack, the totality of it, the lack of any restraint or proportion. The sense that, once roused, the Ents did not merely do what was necessary, but everything they were capable of doing. It brings us back to the question of Yavanna's mandate. The Ents were created to defend the forests against all threats, not to defend proportionally or reasonably or with due consideration for the rights and dignity of sentient beings. Simply to defend, by any means necessary, with the full force of their power. This is Old Testament justice. This is the flood that drowns the world, the fire that consumes cities, the plagues that kill indiscriminately. It is divine wrath channeled through natural forces, and it does not concern itself with individual culpability or the possibility of redemption. Treebeard, in those moments of fury, was not a character making moral choices. He was an instrument of wrath, a force of nature given direction and unleashed upon those who had violated sacred boundaries. The water they released from the dams did not merely flood Isengard's caverns. It drowned those within, trapped orcs and men in underground chambers where they died gasping in darkness, clawing at walls that offered no escape. The water rose slowly enough that they would have known their fate was sealed, would have had minutes or perhaps hours to contemplate their death as the air pockets shrank and the cold water climbed. Is this any different from torture, from deliberate cruelty? The published version does not ask us to consider this. The flooding is presented as tactical genius, a way to neutralize Isengard's power without the Ents having to penetrate every chamber and corridor. And this is true. But it is also true that the method chosen was one that maximized suffering for those trapped inside. Did Treebeard consider this? Did he weigh the tactical advantages against the morality of death by drowning? Or did he simply not care? Were the lives of orcs and men so far beneath his concern that their manner of death was irrelevant, a detail beneath notice? This is the darkness at the heart of the Isengard battle. Not that the Ents fought, they had every right to fight. Not even that they killed in war, killing is sadly necessary. But that they killed with such thoroughness, such lack of restraint, such apparent satisfaction in the exercise of overwhelming power against those who could not meaningfully resist. And Treebeard led them. Treebeard, who had counseled patience and thoughtfulness. Treebeard, who measured his words and his steps with such care. Treebeard, who seemed the very embodiment of wisdom. In battle, that mask fell away. And what was revealed underneath was not gentle, was not kind, was not restrained by ordinary moral considerations. What was revealed was a force of nature, terrible, implacable, and utterly without mercy. The sun rose over Isengard's ruins. Saruman's power was broken. The Ents had achieved their objective. And in the wreckage, among the rubble and the drowned corpses and the crushed remains of what had been a mighty fortress, Treebeard stood, triumphant, satisfied, regretful. The text does not tell us. Tolkien, in his final revision, leaves Treebeard's emotional state opaque at this moment. We are told that he speaks with Gandalf, that he posts guards, that he returns to tending the forest. But of what he felt, having at last unleashed the full fury of his nature, having killed hundreds or perhaps thousands, having enacted the kind of judgment that he had been holding in reserve for centuries of this, we are told nothing. Perhaps Tolkien himself was uncertain. Perhaps this was the moment where he recognized most clearly the darkness he had woven into Treebeard's character, and chose to draw a veil over it rather than examine it too closely. Or perhaps the silence is the point. Perhaps we are meant to understand that Treebeard's interiority at this moment is simply unknowable, that whatever passed through his ancient mind in the aftermath of slaughter operates according to categories and values, so alien to mortal comprehension that any attempt to describe it would fail. The Ents return to Fangorn. The war continues. And in the devastated ruins of Isengard, the water slowly drains, revealing the full extent of what nature's wrath can accomplish when finally roused. In that fury, the line between savior and destroyer vanished, leaving only the echo of Treebeard's choice. The archives hold secrets. In Oxford and Milwaukee, in climate-controlled rooms where Tolkien's manuscripts rest in acid-free boxes, there exist drafts and fragments that tell a different story than the published text. Not contradicting it precisely, but adding layers, revealing intentions that were later obscured or abandoned. Christopher Tolkien's monumental work in editing the History of Middle-earth series has made many of these available to scholars. And among them are passages concerning Treebeard that never made it into the final version of The Lord of the Rings. Passages that reveal just how dark the professor's original conception truly was. In one early draft, housed among the papers at Marquette University, there exists a conversation between Treebeard and the hobbits that is far more unsettling than anything in the published version. Here, Treebeard explicitly discusses his attitude toward the younger races, and it is not positive. He speaks of men as weeds that spread too quickly, of dwarves as stone-eaters who understand nothing of growing things, even of elves as teaching the trees to speak and then abandoning them to silence. There is bitterness in this characterization, resentment, a sense of betrayal that has festered over centuries, and there are rules in Fangorn, he tells them. Rules that predate Gondor, that predate even the Eldar. Rules written not in words, but in the boundaries themselves, in the nature of the forest, in what it permits and what it does not. Those who break the rules, he says, and here the draft becomes chilling, become part of the forest in ways they did not intend. What does this mean? The implication, never quite stated but impossible to miss, is that Fangorn itself is fed by those who trespass against it. That the roots drink not merely water, but whatever nourishment can be extracted from those who violate its sanctity. That the forest grows fat on intruders, on woodcutters, on anyone foolish enough to enter with intentions the trees deem hostile. This version of Treebeard is not merely indifferent to the younger races, but actively hostile. He tolerates them when they stay outside Fangorn's boundaries, but the moment they enter, they become subject to laws that recognize no appeal, no mitigation, no mercy. Another fragment, this one from the drafts collected in the Treason of Isengard, describes Treebeard's eyes in far more detail than the published version. Here, Pippin describes looking into them and seeing not merely age but malice. Not directed at him specifically, but present nonetheless. A deep, abiding anger at the state of the world, at the triumph of the quick over the slow, at the endless depredations against the trees that he has witnessed and been unable to prevent. He hates us, Pippin says in this draft. Not me or Merry particularly, but what we represent, the hasty peoples, the cutters and burners. Merry replies, then why does he let us live? And Pippin's answer, because we might be useful, or because we haven't given him sufficient reason yet. But the reason is there, waiting. I can feel it. This exchange was cut from the final version. Understandably, it undermines the friendship that develops between the hobbits and Treebeard, makes their relationship transactional rather than genuine. But its existence in the drafts reveals something crucial about Tolkien's original conception. Treebeard was not meant to be a gentle giant who quickly warms to the small folk. He was meant to be a judge who temporarily withholds judgment, a predator who chooses not to strike, a force of potential violence that restrains itself only as long as its stringent conditions are met. There are also notes, fragmentary, scattered across different manuscripts, suggesting that Tolkien considered making Treebeard explicitly an antagonist in early versions of the story. Not allied with Sauron, certainly, but not allied with the Fellowship either. A third power, pursuing his own ancient agenda, willing to destroy Isengard not to help Rohan, but to punish a betrayer of the trees. In some of these notes, Treebeard actually refuses to let Merry and Pippin leave Fangorn. not imprisoning them exactly, but making it clear that they have entered his domain and will remain there until he decides they may go. The hobbits become, in effect, hostages treated well, given food and drink, kept safe, but fundamentally not free. This version of the story was abandoned, presumably because it complicated the narrative unacceptably. The Fellowship needed allies, and the Ents provided a crucial intervention at Isengard. Making them ambiguous or hostile would have required a complete restructuring of the plot. But the fact that Tolkien even considered it tells us something. It reveals that, in his mind, the Ents, and Treebeard especially, were not automatically good. They were powerful, they were ancient, they had their own agendas and priorities. And those priorities did not necessarily align with the Fellowship's quest or with conventional morality. The professor wrestled with this. We can see it in the evolution of the drafts, in the gradual softening of Treebeard's character, in the addition of warmth and humor that make him sympathetic. Each revision moves him further from the dark, judgmental figure of the early drafts toward the beloved character of the published text. But the darkness was there first. It was foundational. And though Tolkien painted over it, layer by layer, until it was barely visible, it never quite disappeared. It remains beneath the surface, detectable by those who know where to look, present in the text's silences and ambiguities. There is one more fragment worth mentioning. In Christopher Tolkien's notes to the peoples of Middle-earth, he references a conversation with his father about the nature of the Ents. J.R.R. apparently expressed uncertainty about whether the Ents, as presented in The Lord of the Rings, were too gentle for what they were meant to be. He worried, Christopher records, that readers would see them as comic figures rather than as the terrifying guardians he had originally envisioned. That the essential horror of beings so powerful, so ancient, so utterly other than the children of Iluvatar, had been lost in the telling. Whether this concern was justified is debatable. Many readers do indeed find the Ents somewhat comic, with their endless deliberations and strange speech patterns. But others recognize the underlying power, the potential for devastating violence that rumbles beneath the slow wisdom. What is clear is that Tolkien himself was aware of the tension, was aware that he had, perhaps, softened Treebeard more than the character's conceptual foundations warranted. That there was a disconnect between the dark potential he had glimpsed in his initial creation and the ultimately heroic figure who appeared in the published work. The manuscripts rest in their boxes. The drafts lie protected behind glass and climate control. And in their pages, in the variations and alternatives and abandoned paths, there walks a different Treebeard. Darker, stranger, more terrible. The Treebeard that might have been, had Tolkien followed his first vision to its logical conclusion. What Tolkien later softened hides a truth long buried in Fangorn's shadow. How we see a character often depends less on what they are than on what we need them to be. And for most readers, encountering the Lord of the Rings at whatever age and in whatever context, Treebeard fills a very specific need. He is the voice of nature, the guardian of the wild, the representative of a world older and in some ways wiser than the quick fires of mortal civilizations. We need him to be good. We need him to be gentle. We need him to be on our side, the side of the Fellowship, the side of life against Sauron's death worship, the side that resists industrialization and exploitation of the natural world. And Tolkien, recognizing this need, gave us a Treebeard who fulfills it. The published version of the character is deeply sympathetic. His slow speech invites patience. His friendship with Merry and Pippin demonstrates capacity for connection across the boundaries of species. His fury at Isengard is righteous, proportional, justified. He is, in every way that matters for the story's moral economy, a hero. Peter Jackson's film adaptation amplified this interpretation. In the movies, Treebeard is voiced with grandfatherly warmth by John Rhys Davies, though using a different actor's physical performance through motion capture. He is wise, kind, protective. The scene where he carries Merry and Pippin through Fangorn, pointing out the beauty of his realm, is tender almost to the point of sentimentality. And the march on Isengard. In the films, it becomes a moment of triumph, of nature rising up against industry, scored with swelling music and shot with all the heroism the medium can convey. The violence is sanitized, rendered exciting rather than horrific. The Ents are unambiguous heroes coming to save the day. This interpretation has dominated popular understanding of the character. Ask a casual fan about Treebeard and they will speak of his wisdom, his love of the forest, his slow but certain intervention in the war. They will quote, "Do not be hasty," and smile at the memory of the hobbits' impatience during the Ent Moot. None of this is wrong precisely. It is all supported by the text. Treebeard is indeed wise, is indeed connected to the forest, does indeed speak slowly and think deeply, but it is incomplete. It is the surface reading, the interpretation that takes the text at face value without probing the shadows beneath. Scholars of Tolkien have done better, but even among academics, there is reluctance to push too hard on the question of Treebeard's darkness. Partly this is because the evidence in the published text is subtle, easy to miss, or to interpret benignly. Partly it is because readers have such affection for the character that suggesting he might be morally compromised feels almost like blasphemy. And partly, I suspect, it is because confronting Treebeard's potential darkness means confronting uncomfortable questions about nature itself, about whether natural is synonymous with good, about what it means to defend a domain with absolute conviction and overwhelming power. These are questions our culture is only beginning to grapple with. In Tolkien's day, the environmentalist movement as we know it had barely begun. The automatic equation of nature with virtue, of the wild with the good, was still largely unquestioned in popular discourse. But Tolkien, with his deep reading of medieval and ancient sources, would have known better. He would have known that nature, in older traditions, was not gentle. That forests were places of danger, that wild things were to be feared as much as revered, that the green world operated according to principles that cared nothing for human or elvish welfare. He built some of this into Fangorn. The forest is dangerous. It actively resists intrusion. People disappear into it and are never seen again. Even the Rohirrim, brave warriors all, will not enter it except under extreme duress. But he also, whether from narrative necessity or from a desire to offer hope, gave us a guardian of that dangerous realm who could be befriended, who could be reasoned with, who could become an ally. This tension has never been fully resolved. Not in the text, not in adaptations, not in scholarly interpretation. Treebeard remains, in this sense, genuinely ambiguous, a character who can be read multiple ways depending on what elements you choose to emphasize. Is he the gentle shepherd? Yes. Is he the terrifying guardian? Also yes. Is he the wise counselor? Certainly. Is he the calculating manipulator? The evidence suggests this is also possible. Is he the righteous avenger? Undoubtedly. Is he the instrument of wrathful judgment? This too seems true. The character contains multitudes, in Whitman's phrase, and rather than seeing this as a contradiction or a failure of characterization, we should perhaps recognize it as a triumph of complexity. Tolkien created in Treebeard a figure who cannot be reduced to a simple label, who resists easy categorization, who rewards deeper examination. But that examination requires us to look honestly at what we find, to acknowledge the darkness alongside the light, to recognize that the same qualities that make Treebeard admirable, his deep loyalty to the forest, his absolute commitment to his mandate, his patient accumulation of power over millennia, could, in other contexts or directed toward other ends, be profoundly troubling. Perhaps this is Tolkien's point. Perhaps the ambiguity is intentional, meant to teach us that power, however benevolently deployed, is still power. That age and wisdom do not automatically confer moral authority. That even the best-intentioned guardian can become, under the right circumstances, an oppressor. Or perhaps I am reading too much into silences and ambiguities, finding darkness where Tolkien intended only depth. The truth, as so often with Middle-earth, likely lies in the fertile ground between these interpretations. Treebeard is neither purely heroic nor secretly villainous, neither transparent ally nor hidden antagonist. He is what he is, ancient, powerful, operating according to principles that predate and transcend mortal ethics, capable of great kindness, capable of great violence, shaped by a mandate that makes no distinction between defense and destruction. And readers, encountering him in whatever context and with whatever needs, will see in him what they are prepared to see: the gentle giant, or the shadow beneath the leaves, or more likely, some complex amalgam of both, which is perhaps the truest reading of all. Perhaps the Ent we love is not the Treebeard Tolkien first imagined. As our examination draws toward its close, we must pause and ask a deeper question. What does it mean to call Treebeard evil? What does it mean to apply that label to a being so fundamentally different from the races to whom we usually apply moral categories? Evil, in Tolkien's framework, is not merely the absence of good or the doing of harm. It is something more specific. It is the corruption of purpose, the perversion of what was meant to be. Morgoth was evil because he sought to destroy rather than create, to dominate rather than nurture. Sauron was evil because he turned his gifts toward enslaving others, toward imposing his will upon the world. Evil, for Tolkien, is fundamentally about the wrong use of power, the betrayal of one's essential nature and purpose. By this definition, can Treebeard be called evil? He has not betrayed his nature. Quite the opposite, he fulfills it with almost terrifying completeness. He defends the forest. He guards the trees. He exercises the mandate given him by Yavanna with absolute fidelity. If there is darkness in his actions, it stems not from corruption, but from the nature of that mandate itself. Yavanna created the Ents to be shields against exploitation, bastions against the cutting and burning that the waking races would inevitably bring. She did not create them to be mediators or diplomats. She created them to be barriers, and barriers, by their nature, must be absolute. A wall that allows passage is no wall at all. So perhaps the question is not whether Treebeard is evil, but whether Yavanna's mandate itself contains a kind of darkness. Whether the absolute defense of nature, without consideration for the needs and rights of other sentient beings, is itself a moral failing. This is deep theological water, And Tolkien, for all his sophistication as a mythmaker, never fully resolved it. The tension between civilization and wilderness runs through all his work. The Shire is beloved specifically because it represents a harmony between the two cultivated gardens, yes, but also wild hedgerows. Farmland, yes, but also forests and hills where the wild things still roam. But Fangorn represents the opposite pole, nature utterly uncompromising, wilderness that will not be tamed or cultivated or even safely visited. And Treebeard, as its guardian, embodies that uncompromising stance. Is this darkness? Or is it simply the necessary counterweight to civilization's expansive tendency? I suspect Tolkien would have answered, both. That he recognized the necessity of spaces like Fangorn, of guardians like Treebeard, while also acknowledging the costs they exact, the exclusions they require, the violence they must occasionally employ to maintain their boundaries. The professor was too thoughtful, too steeped in the complexities of medieval theology and ancient myth to offer simplistic answers. He gave us instead a character who embodies the problem without resolving it, who is simultaneously necessary and troubling, admirable and unsettling, heroic and potentially terrible. Consider the imagery Tolkien uses when describing Fangorn and its master. There is beauty there, certainly. The ancient trees, the play of light through the leaves, the deep peace of a place where the quick races do not intrude. But there is also darkness in the most literal sense. The forest is dim, shadowed, difficult to navigate. The trees press close. The paths twist and turn. It is easy to become lost, easy to feel that the forest itself is conspiring to confuse and trap. This is not accidental imagery. It is thematically essential. Fangorn is meant to be both beautiful and threatening, both worthy of protection and dangerous to enter. And Treebeard, as its personification, must embody that same duality. He is the shadow beneath the canopy, the darkness that makes the light, when it does penetrate, seem more precious, the threat that makes safety, when achieved, feel earned rather than given. Without that darkness, without the sense that Treebeard could, under the wrong circumstances, become an enemy rather than an ally, his role in the story would be diminished. He would become merely a plot device, a convenient source of military power to be deployed against Saruman. The depth would be lost. But with that darkness present, even if only as potential, as something hinted at in silences and ambiguities, with that darkness acknowledged, Treebeard becomes one of Tolkien's most sophisticated creations. A character who cannot be easily categorized, who challenges our assumptions about goodness and power, who forces us to consider what it truly means to be a guardian of something precious. The cost of absolute protection is absolute exclusion. The cost of defending the wild is denying access to it. The cost of ensuring that the trees will never be despoiled is accepting that those who despoil them, or who are merely suspected of intending to despoil them, will face wrath without mercy. Treebeard has paid these costs. Willingly or not, consciously or not, he has chosen protection over inclusion, defense over engagement, isolation over the risks of connection. And in making those choices, or in having them made for him by the nature of his creation, he has become a figure of shadow as well as light, a protector whose protection comes with conditions that not everyone can meet, a guardian whose judgment, once rendered, is final and terrible. The canopy overhead blocks out the sun. The roots below tap into darkness. And Treebeard, between earth and sky, stands as a reminder that power, even righteous power, always casts shadows, always exacts costs, always contains within itself the potential for terror. This is not a flaw in Tolkien's creation. It is its deepest truth. And we, walking through Fangorn in imagination, feeling the weight of its ancient silence, sensing the presence of its even more ancient guardian, we do well to remember that awe and fear are not opposite reactions, but two aspects of the same recognition. We are in the presence of something vast, something powerful, something whose full nature we cannot comprehend and whose judgment we cannot predict. We are in the presence of the shadow beneath the canopy, and it is watching. It has always been watching. Even the kindest of giants may carry the weight of darkness within. We have walked far into Fangorn now, deeper than any path leads, deeper than even Merry and Pippin ventured in their time with Treebeard. We have examined the layers of this character, peeled back the revisions, uncovered the darker intentions that lay beneath the published text. And now, as we prepare to emerge from these shadows, we must ask, what have we learned? What does this examination reveal, not merely about Treebeard, but about Tolkien's moral imagination, about the nature of power and guardianship in Middle-earth? First, and perhaps most importantly, we have learned that Tolkien's world is not one of simple binaries. Good and evil exist. Certainly, Sauron is unambiguously evil, Gandalf unambiguously good. But between these poles lies a vast territory of complexity, ambiguity, and moral difficulty. Treebeard inhabits that territory. He is not evil, but neither is he simply good. He is a being whose actions serve the cause of the free peoples while also potentially embodying a darkness that has nothing to do with Sauron's shadow. His wrath is righteous, but righteousness does not preclude terror. His protection is necessary, but necessity does not eliminate moral cost. Second, we have learned something about the evolution of Tolkien's creative process. The journey from the darker early drafts to the gentler published version reveals an author grappling with how much complexity his narrative could bear, how much ambiguity he could ask his readers to hold, how much discomfort he could generate without undermining the heroic framework of his story. In the end, he chose to soften Treebeard, to make him more accessible, more sympathetic, more clearly aligned with the Fellowship's cause. This was likely the right choice for the story he was telling, but in making it, he buried, though not completely, a vision of something stranger and more unsettling. Third, we have learned about ourselves as readers. The fact that Treebeard's darkness has been so little remarked upon, so rarely discussed even in scholarly contexts, reveals something about our needs and expectations. We want nature to be benevolent. We want guardians to be gentle. We want power, when directed toward ends we approve, to be free of moral complication. But Tolkien, at least in his initial conception, was willing to challenge these comfortable assumptions, was willing to suggest that even righteous guardianship can shade into something darker, that even necessary protection can be enacted with a violence that troubles easy categories. The drafts remember what the published text obscures. The manuscripts hold visions that were too complex, too challenging, too uncomfortable for the narrative Tolkien ultimately committed to paper. But they exist. In archives in Oxford and Milwaukee, in the volumes of the history of Middle-earth, in Christopher Tolkien's meticulous documentation of his father's creative process, they exist. Available to those willing to look, to those prepared to see Treebeard not as the character we want him to be, but as the character he might have been. And perhaps, as something closer to what he still is, beneath the gentle surface. Because here is the thing about powerful characters, about figures who exist across centuries or millennia. They cannot be reduced to simple descriptions. They contain their histories within them, carry their pasts forward into each present moment. And Treebeard's past, as we have seen, contains wrath, contains judgment, contains the capacity for overwhelming violence deployed without mercy or remorse. That capacity does not disappear simply because it is not currently being exercised. It remains, latent but present, waiting for circumstances that might call it forth again. The War of the Ring is over. Sauron is defeated. The quick races rebuild their kingdoms and tend their gardens and gradually forget the terror of the shadow. And in Fangorn, Treebeard returns to his patient guardianship, his slow wanderings through the forest, his deep communion with the trees. But what has he learned from his participation in the war? What has been awakened in him by the march on Isengard, by the exercise of his full power, by the taste of justified wrath? The text does not tell us. Tolkien leaves Treebeard's final state unexamined, a question mark at the margins of his mythology. Does the Ent return to his previous isolation, his previous restraint? Or has something changed, some threshold been crossed, some potential realized that cannot now be forgotten? And if men, in ages to come, begin again to spread, to multiply, to need timber and farmland and all the resources that growing civilizations require, what then? When the next generation comes to Fangorn's borders with axes and saws, will they find the gentle shepherd of the old tales? Or will they find something that remembers Isengard, that has learned what it is capable of, that has tasted victory and judges itself ready to defend its domain by any means necessary? These are not idle questions. They go to the heart of what guardianship means, what it costs, what it can become when circumstances push it to extremes. Treebeard is a warning as much as he is a hero. A reminder that power, even in the service of preservation, can corrupt. That righteousness can curdle into self-righteousness. That the difference between protection and oppression often depends less on the act itself than on whose perspective we adopt. From the trees' perspective, Treebeard is a savior, a champion, the embodiment of their will to survive against the cutting races. From the Ents' perspective, he is a leader, an eldest, a being who carries forward their purpose across the ages. But from the perspective of those who might need to enter Fangorn, who might have no choice but to traverse its dangers or even in extremity, to take from its bounty to survive. From their perspective, Treebeard is an obstacle, a judge who cannot be appealed, a force that may decide their fate according to criteria they do not understand and cannot influence. This is the echo of forgotten wrath, not merely what Treebeard has done, but what he represents. The principle of absolute boundaries, of lines that cannot be crossed without facing consequences that are total, terminal, beyond negotiation or mercy. It is a principle that Tolkien, in his wisdom, recognized as both necessary and dangerous. Necessary because without boundaries, without protection, everything precious would be consumed by the hungry expansion of civilization. Dangerous because absolute power, even in defense of the defenseless, is still absolute power, and absolute power always contains within itself the seeds of tyranny. Treebeard stands at that boundary, between guardian and tyrant, between protector and destroyer, between the heroic figure of the published text and the darker being of the early drafts. He stands there still, in Fangorn, moving slowly through his domain, tending his trees, remembering the ages that have passed and watching for whatever ages are yet to come. And in the slow time of his consciousness, in thoughts that unfold over seasons and years, he considers perhaps what he has become, what he was meant to be, what he might yet turn into if circumstances demand it. The shadow beneath the canopy does not dissipate with the ending of the story. It remains, patient and permanent, a reminder that in Middle-earth, and perhaps in any world that takes itself seriously, goodness is never simple, power is never safe, and even the kindest of giants may harbor depths that daylight never fully illuminates. Treebeard's shadow stretches beyond pages and stories, reminding us that even the guardians of life may harbor the darkest seeds, the mist parts. After our long journey through Fangorn, through drafts and revisions, through the archaeology of Tolkien's imagination, we find ourselves at the forest's edge once more. Behind us, the ancient trees stand silent. No wind moves their branches. No bird calls break the stillness. The forest waits, as it has always waited, patient beyond mortal comprehension. And somewhere in those depths, Treebeard walks still. Slow footfall by slow footfall, measuring the boundaries of his realm, communing with the trees, carrying forward a mandate given in the world's youth when the Valor still walked openly in Middle-earth. Is he evil? The question, we have seen, has no simple answer. Evil is too crude a label for the complexities we have uncovered, too blunt an instrument for the moral ambiguities Tolkien wove into this character. But is he dangerous? Absolutely. To those who threaten what he guards, he is implacably, terrifyingly dangerous. His power is vast, his judgment final, his methods without mercy when mercy would compromise his purpose. Is he a hero? In the context of the War of the Ring, unquestionably. His interventions saved Rohan, broke Saruman's power, contributed materially to the defeat of Sauron. The Free Peoples owe him debt they can never fully repay. But is he good? That depends, perhaps, on how we define goodness. If it means benevolent intention, care for those in one's charge, faithfulness to one's purpose, then yes, Treebeard is good. But if it requires consideration for all sentient beings, proportionality in response to threats, mercy toward the weak and misguided, then the answer becomes less certain. What we have learned in this long examination is that Treebeard is a mirror. In him, we see reflected our own attitudes toward nature, toward power, toward the relationship between civilization and wilderness. And what we see depends, in large part, on what we bring to the viewing. Those who see primarily the threat of industrial exploitation will see in Treebeard a necessary champion, a bulwark against despoliation, a hero whose every action is justified by the magnitude of what he protects. Those who value individual rights and the primacy of consciousness will see something more troubling. A being whose absolute commitment to his domain leaves no room for the legitimate needs of others, whose judgment admits no appeal, whose wrath, once roused, recognizes no proportion or restraint. Both readings are supported by the text. Both are, in their way, true. And perhaps that is Tolkien's deepest achievement with this character, that he created a figure who cannot be reduced to a simple lesson or moral, who challenges us to think deeply about what we value and why, who reveals the contradictions inherent in our own desires for both preservation and progress. The sun sets over Fangorn. The red light, filtering through the canopy, makes the shadows deeper, the darkness more profound. And in that darkness, eyes glint, ancient eyes, patient eyes. Eyes that have watched kingdoms rise and fall, that have seen ages pass like seasons, that will likely watch the end of all things with the same slow thoughtfulness they have always shown. Treebeard endures, not merely in the published text, but in all his iterations, all his possibilities. The gentle shepherd and the terrifying judge, the friend of hobbits and the doom of those who harm trees, the hero of Isengard and the shadow beneath the canopy. All of these are true. All of these are Treebeard. And in the archives, in the forgotten drafts, in the alternative paths that Tolkien considered and then abandoned, there walks a darker Treebeard still. One who might have been, in a different telling, not a hero at all, but something far more ambiguous. A force of nature who cared nothing for the quick races and their brief fires. A guardian whose protection was indistinguishable from imprisonment. A judge whose verdicts were enforced with overwhelming violence and no possibility of appeal. That Treebeard was softened, gentled, made into a figure who could be loved rather than merely feared. But he was not erased. He exists still, in the spaces between words, in the silences of the text, in the questions that Tolkien raised and chose not to answer. The trees remember. The roots remember. The forest remembers. And Treebeard, eldest and most patient of guardians, remembers too. What he remembers, what truths about his nature and his purpose he carries in the slow depths of his consciousness, we cannot fully know. We can only glimpse darkly through the veil of Tolkien's prose and the layers of his revisions. But the glimpse is enough. Enough to understand that we have been walking all this time in the presence of something vast and powerful and ultimately unknowable. Something that wears the mask of benevolence, but may, beneath that mask, operate according to principles that predate morality itself. The path out of Fangorn lies open now. We can leave, as Merry and Pippin left, carrying with us stories of the gentle giant who befriended us, who showed us wonders, who roused himself to righteous fury against evil. But we will remember, too, what lies in the shadow, what the drafts revealed and the published text only hints at. We will remember that kindness from the powerful is always, in some sense, an act of forbearance. That gentleness from those capable of overwhelming violence is a choice, not a nature. That mercy, when it comes from beings who could as easily dispense judgment, is a gift and not a right. We will remember Treebeard in all his complexity, and we will understand that we have been in the presence of a mystery that Tolkien himself may not have fully understood, a darkness that he saw clearly enough to be unsettled by it, but deeply enough to be unable to entirely contain or explain it. The forest watches us leave. Treebeard, somewhere in its depths, is aware of our departure. Perhaps he has been aware of our presence all along, of our examination of his nature, our excavation of his secrets. And perhaps, in his slow way, he approves. Or perhaps he is indifferent, unconcerned with what the quick races think of him, secure in the knowledge that he will endure long after our questions have faded into the silence of forgotten ages. The trees whisper. The roots speak. And in the language they share, older than words, deeper than thought, a truth persists. Even guardians cast shadows. Even heroes carry darkness. Even the kindest of giants may hold, in the depths of their ancient hearts, the potential for wrath beyond measure or mercy. Remember this. Remember Treebeard. Remember Fangorn. Remember that the forest still stands and its guardian still walks, and the boundaries he defends have not changed, and the mandate he fulfills has not softened with the ages. Remember and watch the shadows beneath the trees, for they are watching you. They have always been watching. And they will watch still, long after these words are forgotten, long after even the memory of Tolkien has faded into legend. The darkness endures. And in the darkness, something slow and patient and terrible in its power continues its endless vigil. The wrath has not ended. It has only paused, waiting. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.